Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar. I'm Jeff Antos from the Weinberg Group, and I'll be moderating today's session on the Orange Book as a strategic resource. For more than 30 years, the Weinberg Group has provided regulatory and compliance consulting to our pharma and biotech clients. Headquartered in Washington, D.C., we work with large and small companies worldwide and provide full regulatory outsourcing to a number of our clients. I know you're going to enjoy our speaker today, Dr. Nick Fleischer, Vice President in our D.C. office. Dr. Fleischer, who's known worldwide for his expertise in bioequivalence issues, spends most of his time helping clients create and execute winning regulatory strategies for their products. Prior to joining the Weinberg Group, Nick spent several years at FDA and was the Director of the Division of Bioequivalence in CDER's Office of Generic Drugs. Now, if you have questions during the presentation, you'll see on the left side of your screen a Q&A box. You can click that, type your question in, and Nick and I will try to answer them the best we can at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fleischer. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you, Jeff. I also want to add my welcome to Jeff for joining us on this webinar on the Orange Book. While my presentation today will be focused mainly toward the use of the Orange Book in the pharmaceutical industry, my first exposure to this document occurred while I was still practicing pharmacy. One of my responsibilities in running a hospital pharmacy was to make a purchasing decision, and I found the Orange Book to be a fantastic resource in my job back then. My discussion today, as you can see on this slide that's in front of you, will attempt to cover the historical perspective of the Orange Book, who and how is the content of the book managed, the different ways to access the book, what is and what is not in the book. And with time permitting, I will summarize what I believe are the most important uses of the Orange Book for people in the pharmaceutical industry. As you can see by the picture of the cover of the 18th edition of the Orange Book, why it is called the Orange Book. For those of you who have tried to stump your friends by asking them who is buried in Grant's tomb, you can improve on that question by asking them, what is the color of the Orange Book? Since I arrived at the FDA shortly after the book was published, I can't verify if this is true, but as stated on the FDA's website, the book was being prepared right around Halloween time. And I'm guessing there were pumpkins and decorations around the office, so decided to make the cover orange, as we can see that the name has stuck for the last 33 years and is still called the Orange Book. Then again, who wants to call it by the full title, which is Approved Drug Products with Therapeutic Evaluations Book, Equivalence Evaluations? I mean, that is really a mouthful, and Orange Book just rolls off the tongue so much easier. It's sort of like calling the Waxman-Hatch Act, or if you prefer to call it the Hatch-Waxman Act, the Drug Price, Competition, and Patent Term Restoration Act of 1984. Again, everybody refers to that act as the Waxman-Hatch Act or Hatch-Waxman Act. As seen on this slide, this is the cover from the 18th edition, which I've held on to even though it is from 1998. I also have some older editions on my bookshelf and will on occasion refer to those, and I will explain later in my presentation of the importance of having a hard copy versus an electronic copy. Two very important things to note from the title of the book. The first, as said in the title, this is approved drug products, and we'll touch upon that later, but it's important to note that these are approved drug products and approved by the FDA. So if you're looking for the NDA or ANDA for like thyroid tablets, you will not find it because thyroid tablets are marketed without FDA approval. And interestingly, for many years, even levothyroxine, which is an analog of thyroid, was not in the Orange Book, but that is topic for another webinar as to why it was or wasn't. Currently, levothyroxine is listed in the Orange Book. The second thing to note from the title is therapeutic evaluations, and I will be discussing that topic later in my presentation, and it's probably, in my opinion, one of the most important aspects of the Orange Book. So to start with the history of where this all started. Back in 1974, the Office of Biotechnology Assessment convened a drug bioequivalence study panel. For those of you interested in the history of bioequivalence, I recommend reading the report of the panel, as you will find it very interesting. The panel was tasked with determining if technological capability was available to assure that drug products with the same physical and chemical composition would produce comparable therapeutic effects. One of the recommendations of the panel, and I quote from the panel report, a system should be organized as rapidly as possible to generate an official list of interchangeable drug products. So as you can see, the derivation of the book was both as far as a listing of the approved drug products and also the interchangeability, which kind of linked to the therapeutic equivalence, which I'll talk about later. We know that good work takes time, so 5 years later in 1979, the FDA published a proposed rule in the Federal Register to establish a list of the then currently marketed prescription drug products that had been approved by the FDA through NDAs and ANDAs. The final rule, after evaluating the public comments on the proposed rule, was published in the Federal Register on October 31st, 1980, and it was around Halloween time, and that brings us back to why the book is called the Orange Book. In 1984, the Waxman-Hatch Act included a provision that the Secretary publish and make available to the public a list in alphabetical order of the official and proprietary name of each drug which had been approved for safety and effectiveness, the date of approval if approved after 1981, and the number of the application, and whether in vitro or in vivo bioequivalence studies or both would be required for applications referring to the drugs on the list. It also included a provision that drugs that had been withdrawn from sale for safety or effectiveness reasons may not be published in the list. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about the discontinued section of the Orange Book. So who maintains the Orange Book? At the current time, which is a little bit different than when it first came out, when it originally came out, it was maintained by the Office of Drug Information at the Center for Drugs, but currently it is maintained in the Office of Generic Drugs within CDER. And specifically, there is what's called the Orange Book staff, which is in the Division of Labeling and Program Support. On this slide, you can see the contact information for that group in case you have any questions regarding the Orange Book. So they have a website and they have a fax number, but the phone number that was listed in one of the resources is no longer connected. So the only way that you can really get in touch with the FDA in regard to an Orange Book question is either through that website link or to send them a fax to the Orange Book staff. Now, I'm going to be going back and forth during my presentation between a hard copy version and an electronic version because the book is available, or at least the information in the book is available both ways, and I'll try to contrast and compare the different aspects of using the hard copy version versus the electronic version. As opposed to the hard copy version, the electronic version is updated on a daily basis, but only for generic drug information. As you can see by the example I've included on this slide, on November 13, the FDA approved 2 drugs. They may have approved other ones, but these are the ones that I picked out as being informative to show us the difference between the listing that appears in the electronic version of the Orange Book between a generic drug and an NDA product. The first product I listed there, Umbrevica, Imbrutinib, was approved on November 13 as an NDA, and it's not listed in the Orange Book. In fact, I verified that this morning that even today, it's still not listed in the Orange Book a week later. However, Actavis received an ANDA approval for an extended-release tablet of lamotrigine, and also approved on November 13th, and that is listed in the Orange Book. So there is definitely a difference between the daily updates that appear in the electronic version between NDAs and ANDAs. And this is somewhat important because of when one thinks about the codes, the therapeutic codes, which I'll talk about later, between an ANDA and a 505(b)(2) NDA. The ANDA getting listed very quickly, and everybody will know what the therapeutic code is because it will get put into the Orange Book, which I will show on a later slide. Whereas the 505(b)(2) NDA, on occasion, is eligible to get an AB rating. Most cases it does not, but because it is an NDA, it would not be listed as quickly as an ANDA. So I did want to point out the difference in the listing between an ANDA being listed very quickly on a daily basis versus NDAs not being listed on a daily basis. How does one actually go about getting the Orange Book? There are several ways to get at the Orange Book and to utilize the Orange Book. The first way, and years ago this was the way that everybody got it before we got into the electronic age, and that was to actually buy the book from the government printing office. And it's still available from the government printing office, and as the first bullet on my slide shows, that's the location where you can buy the book, and the cost as of the latest time that I checked it, to be able to get that. So that would be a way of getting the actual hard copy version directly from the government printing office. However, there is available from the FDA website a downloadable portable document format, a PDF format, and I've given the name of the file on there, which at the current time is 1,346 pages, and is accessible on the link that I provided there. And I will, again, as I said earlier, provide a contrast between what is in the PDF version versus what is on the electronic version. The PDF version is published annually, and there are cumulative supplements that appear on a monthly basis. And the FDA website does indicate that they will or have archives of the older version, which is sometimes good to refer back what happened in previous years. So that should be available. I don't have the link presently for that, and I'm not 100% sure whether it's actually available in archive, and that's one of the reasons why I intend to save older copies and still have some of my older copies. The electronic searchable version, which the website for accessing that is on the slide, is probably the one that most people are used to using in this electronic age because it certainly makes searching a lot easier. And as I said earlier, it's the most up-to-date because, at least from the ANDA world, the generic approvals, they get updated on a daily basis, whereas the other versions are only, as I said, a cumulative supplement that comes out once a month. Now, on the next slide, you see the link for getting the actual PDF version. Now, this slide is a little bit out of order with the next slide that will be coming, but I did want to, before we left the thought about how does one actually get a hard copy version if you wanted one. So this would be the link that you would click on for getting the annual edition. And as I said earlier, it is a fairly big file, but you can download the entire document and have a hard copy printable version of this document in a portable document format and a hard copy version to read and to go through. As I said earlier, that it does say that there will be an archive page of annual editions, but it doesn't give a link as to where that is as of yet. And then the other thing that you can download is the cumulative supplement. And if you do subscribe to the FDA news, the CEDAR news on a daily basis, you will see that they will announce when a new supplement has become available. But this is the screenshot of what you will see if you do an electronic search on the website. So the first thing that you can click on is publications, and it gets back to the previous slide, which I just showed, which will be the two publications, the annual edition and the cumulative supplement. Then there is a link for frequently asked questions, which describes some of the most commonly asked questions about the Orange Book. As you can see here, there are 5 fields that are searchable within the electronic version. One can search for the active ingredient, and you can type in a few letters, and it will take you to the it will list the active ingredients that have those letters in it. But the site is not very forgiving for spelling, so if you don't spell it exactly right, you either will get nothing or you will get the wrong information. The next accessible point down is the proprietary name. So if you happen to know the trade name of the product, you can do a search by trade name. The problem with that field is that it's not very accurate for some of the products that have like an ANDA that would have a trade name associated with it. In many cases, at least in our experience, we have not been able to find a product that is marketed, that has been approved as an ANDA and has been given a trade name, but the trade name just isn't listed in the Orange Book. The next item down is to search by patent, and I'll talk about this later. So you can actually search by patent number or expiration dates, but as I said, we'll talk about the patents in a little while. The next field on the right-hand side is searching by applicant holder. So if you want to get a listing of all the approvals from a certain applicant, they will be listed when you search in that field. However, you need to be aware that the applicant holder is the person that, or the company, the entity that actually holds the NDA or the ANDA, and not the marketer. So if the product is being marketed by a different person, which is what appears on the label, and you try to search in that field, you will not find that unless the marketer and the applicant are the same, because FDA in this field lists the applicant, the sponsor of the NDA or the ANDA, and not the marketer. And the next field down is to search by application number. So if you actually know the NDA or ANDA number, you can type that in there and we'll come up with the results from what's available for that NDA or ANDA. When you actually click in the box for searching by active ingredient, you will have three options, which again I will discuss later. It's prescription products, over-the-counter products, and discontinued products. And those will be three products list that I will show later on how they actually are in a hard copy version. But when you're actually doing the electronic version, you may sometimes need to go into one or all of those fields to find the information you're looking for a certain product. So the content of the Orange Book, and this is mainly in the PDF version because you wouldn't find this in the electronic version because it doesn't really appear that way. But this is what is included in the Orange Book. And if you actually click on one of the slides earlier that I showed with, it said publications, this would be what you would see when you download the hard copy, the PDF version. The preface of the book provides a good background information of what the book is about. The introduction section of the book provides a very good explanation of the nuts and bolts of how the Orange Book actually works. A lot of good informative information in that. The next section will describe how to use the drug products list and explains what everything that is not self-evident when you actually look at the data that you will be seeing when you either look at the page or you click on a page and you see that information. There are 5 drug products lists in the book, and we'll be discussing those in a little bit later. And then the other thing that is in the book itself is our appendices, which again is something that you don't have in the electronic version. And this is a product name index where the products are listed by generic name if there is no trade name, or by trade name if there is one. So if you're looking for a product just in an alphabetical listing, the appendix of the product name index would be a good place to search for a product. And in Appendix B is a product name sorted by the applicant. So whereas in the electronic version you can actually type in the applicant name and it'll give you all of the approvals for that applicant, in the hard copy version there is a listing of all the applicants with all the products that they have approval for. The third appendix is a listing of uniform terms, which are very valuable because it describes the different dosage forms, the different routes of administration, and the abbreviations that you will find in the Orange Book and how the FDA recognizes all those. And the last part of content is patent and exclusivity information, which is in another addendum, and we'll talk about that later. Now, for the preface section, provides a general description of the content. It goes into historical background, some of which I've discussed already, and it will provide the contact information, which is also something I've discussed in an earlier slide. Now, the introduction section, as I said, is a very informative section. It explains all the different parts that are in the Orange Book, and providing the explanation for what those all mean. So the first section is what is and is not listed in the Orange Book, and we'll discuss this a little later in the presentation. But the introduction section gives you a brief explanation of what is and is not listed in the Orange Book. And as I said earlier, it's only approved products. But I'll get into more detail about that later. It'll talk about the therapeutic equivalence terms. So there's terminology that people need to be familiar with in this arena when you talk about the different things such as pharmaceutical equivalence, pharmaceutical alternatives, therapeutic equivalence, bioavailability, and bioequivalence. So for people that really want a good background understanding of how FDA makes these determinations of bioequivalence and therapeutic equivalence, I think it's very important to read that section and become familiar with all that terminology. Then there's a section that explains bioequivalence. This explains how the FDA actually determines how a product is determined to be bioequivalent from the mathematical and the statistical perspective. And it does go into an in-depth discussion on the statistics that are used for determining bioequivalence. The next section explains what a reference listed drug is. Again, this is another critical aspect of the book, because people, at least in the ANDA world, are always interested in knowing what the FDA recognizes as the reference listed drug that they will have to use when they're conducting their comparative studies in order to be an equivalent to an NDA product. The book does not provide a very good explanation of how the FDA determines what is, or how they come about choosing what the reference listed drug is. But for all intents and purposes, I think the most important thing that people need to know is that there is an identification of what is the reference listed drug. You can go to the Orange Book, find out what that is, and you can use that to pursue your development plans. The problem that is occasionally encountered is that the reference listed drug may not be available on the marketplace, or for some other reason may not be the market leader. And a generic company that wants to basically be an equivalent to a product may think from a business decision that that's not the most optimal reference listed drug that they want to go after. So there is a process, which is explained in the introduction section, whereby somebody can petition the agency to either have the reference listed drug changed or to add another reference listed drug. So people need to be aware of that, because what happens is that if there are two NDAs approved, and there are several examples, one that I can very familiar with is a product called nortriptyline. Years ago, there were two products. Pamelor was a brand name of one, and Aventil was the brand name of the other. And all the generic companies wanted to be bioequivalent against Pamelor, which meant that the Aventil product, which was also an NDA product, never had a generic equivalent to it. So basically, they were protected from generic substitution. So, but as I said, the introduction section does explain how one would go about having the reference listed drug changed or a new one added. Another important section in the introduction is the therapeutic equivalence codes. And this, I know, causes a lot of confusion for many people because, as you will see on a later slide, many people think of it as alphabet soup when you see these A's and the B's and the N's and the O's and the B's and everything like that. So we will discuss that later, but as I said, the introduction gives a very good explanation of this. there's a section on special situations, and this is the FDA uses this section in the Orange Book for areas that merit further discussion. And it's certainly a section that somebody needs to be aware of because there could be situations, for example, if you were to look up and the introduction section gives a very nice explanation about why there are so many levothyroxine products with AB1s, AB2s, and AB3s, so it goes into a lengthy discussion about that. The introduction section also explains how one would go about changing the therapeutic equivalence code. And it does make a difference between changing the therapeutic equivalence code of a drug entity versus a specific drug product. So if new information arises where FDA has determined that for whatever reason an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient, has issues with its bioequivalence and they need to change the therapeutic code for that product, they will change it for every product that has that API in it. However, in certain situations, if they discover that a certain drug product has problems with it, they can just change the therapeutic code for that one product and basically, get it changed possibly from an AB to a BX or some other code that is applicable. And then it explains the discontinued section, which I will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Now, as I said earlier, much of this looks like alphabet soup to many people because it's just a bunch of letters. But the first letter that people need to be, or the first, in the two-letter codes that the FDA uses, it's the first letter that is of critical importance to everybody because the first letter will designate whether a product is therapeutically interchangeable with another product versus not being interchangeable. So if the first letter in a code is an A, that's usually a good thing for interchangeability because it means that FDA has determined that it is a product that does not have any potential therapeutic equivalence problems associated with it and can be considered to be therapeutically equivalent to all the products in that category. The B product is or B code, the first letter B code, is not a good thing because that would mean that the product has it either has not been evaluated to be therapeutic equivalent, or the FDA considers that to be a potential problem for bioequivalence. And as you see here, there are second letters associated with all the codes. The A codes will have if a product is considered to be AA, that means that FDA has determined that the product has no bioequivalence issues, and in order for a product to be approved, you can get that approved based on dissolution or an in vitro test. The second letter there, an AN, is for a product that is a solution or powder for aerosolization, and in that situation, FDA has determined that those products, again, can be considered to be therapeutically equivalent. The AO product is for injectable oils. So it's products that are therapeutically equivalent. The formulation is an injectable oil solution. And in those situations, FDA has considered those to be pharmaceutically and therapeutically equivalent only when the active ingredient, its concentration, and the type of the oil that is used as a vehicle are all identical. So those products will get an AO rating and do not have to do any further studies. The AP therapeutic code is for injectable aqueous solutions, and sometimes it also applies to intravenous non-aqueous solutions. And the reason for this is that the bioavailability of a parenteral product is deemed to be self-evident, so as long as the products are pharmaceutically equivalent, both inactive and active ingredient, they will be given an AP therapeutic code and be fully substitutable. And the last of the AT codes is the AT for topical, T for topical products, and these are for all solutions, topical solutions, and DESI drug products that contain the same active ingredient in the same topical dosage form, for which a waiver of the in vivo bioequivalence has been granted, and for which chemistry and manufacturing processes are adequate to demonstrate bioequivalence. So these products will get an AT code. And then the AB code is used for products that have actually gone through the demonstration of bioequivalence other than an in vitro dissolution test, which would be an AA. So anything else that is therapeutically equivalent and has demonstrated bioequivalence by some form of a test will receive the AB code. On this page, and hopefully you can see it fairly well, I've given some examples of the AB codes, and this is a page out of the electronic version of the book. I'll just quickly go through some of the highlights on this book. On this page. The first column on the left is the application number, and you can see that there are some numbers there that have an A in front of them and some numbers that have an N. The A refers to a product that was approved through the ANDA process, and an N refers to a product that was approved through the NDA process. The next column is the therapeutic code, and I'll get back to that in a minute and talk about the significance of the AB1 and the AB2s that I referred to earlier. The next column is the reference listed drug column, and as you can see, if you read down on the column, most of them are no. However, there is 2 yeses there that signify that those products are reference listed drugs. So when one looks at, and this is another example that I mentioned earlier about nortriptyline, for this specific product, methylphenidate hydrochloride capsule, extended release, oral, which are pharmaceutically equivalent products, and they would be the same strength, there would be different references to drugs because they were approved through the NDA. So NDA 021284, Ritalin LA, being the brand name, is recognized as a reference drug. And then further on down the list, NDA 021259, Meditate CD, is also a reference drug for the pharmaceutically equivalent product other than the different strength of the product, even though Meditate CD also comes in very similar strength as Ritalin LA. To make the point about how products are listed in the Orange Book, as you can see in this example here, everything is listed by the same API name, methylphenidate hydrochloride. In the next column, it's all the same dosage form, capsule, extended release, oral. Going over toward the right-hand side, the next column is the strength of the products that are available. And the next column over is the generic or brand name if one is available. So for several of the products, you just see methylphenidate hydrochloride because that is the generic name. And then other ones, you see the actual brand name, Ritalin LA and Meditate CD further on down. And the next column is the applicant. As I said earlier, the applicant may not be the marketer, but FDA lists the applicant holder in that column or associates with that product. Getting back to the issue about the AB1 and AB2, which also is something that people find very confusing, is if a generic product does a bioequivalence study against one of the references to drugs, that's the product that it will be categorized as being AB toward. So they would get an AB1 if there is more than one. So in this situation, as you can see, there are some products that are AB1 and some products that are AB2, depending on what they use as their reference product in their ANDA application and in their bioequivalence study. Going on with the B therapeutic codes, they're very similar to the A first letter codes with the second letter, and B is products for which there is either actual or potential bioequivalent problems that have not been resolved by adequate evidence of bioequivalence. I'm going to start at the end, and the B star is used for drug products that require further FDA investigation and review to determine if they can be therapeutic equivalent. So it's like a holding place that FDA uses when they can't pigeonhole it into one of the other B categories or give it an A rating. They give it a B star. The BC is used for products that are not bioequivalents but that are not therapeutically equivalent or bioequivalent for extended release dosage forms. The BD is used for products where the active ingredient and dosage forms have a documented bioequivalence problem. A BE is used for delayed release dosage forms, so it differentiates it from the BC, which are extended release dosage forms. So the BE is for delayed release and enteric-coated products that are intended to bypass the stomach but really are not extended release dosage forms. So FDA in those categories gives it a BE rating. The BN is used very similar to the AN rating that I mentioned earlier. It's used for products in aerosol nebulizer drug delivery systems that are found to be not bioequivalent. A BP is used for products that have a potential bioequivalence problem. It's a little different than the B star that I mentioned earlier, but in a BP situation, FDA actually has information that there is a potential for bioequivalence issues. The BR is for suppositories or enemas that deliver drugs for systemic absorption. The BS category is for products that have drug standard deficiencies. So if there are issues with, let's say, a USB monograph or something that FDA feels can impact the therapeutic equivalence of that product, in such a situation, they will give it the BS rating. The BT, again, is very similar to the AT rating, where the BT is for topical products that have bioequivalence issues. And a BX rating is for drug products for which the data are insufficient to determine the therapeutic equivalence of the product. So again, it's a little bit similar to the B star, but FDA considers that the BX to be somewhat of a different category than the B star category. So now I'm going to spend some time talking about the different product lists, and this is probably the meat of this presentation because this is what, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, of how important and how one would go about using the Orange Book. Here I can contrast the electronic version and the hard copy version, the PDF version. This is the same information basically extracted from the, on the top you see what is extracted from the PDF version, and on the bottom the same similar information that is extracted from the electronic version. As you can see, this is for norethindrone tablets packaged in orals of 28, and FDA does list products differently by, as you can see in the bottom, where I've actually included norethindrone acetate, so that's a different line item as far as the FDA is concerned, and it should be. It's a different drug, the norethindrone base. And also they would make a difference whether the packaging for the norethindrone was in a tablet pack of 28s or whether it was in a pack of 21. Even if the 7 tablets that may be included in the pack are like space fillers, holders like ferrous sulfate, ferrous fumarate, one of those products, they would be listed differently in the Orange Book. As you can see on the top, a lot of the same information is there. It identifies the dosage form. It identifies if there is a brand name for the product, which is in the bold letters. It identifies who the application holder is, then the strength of the product, and moving over to the right, it identifies the NDA number, and then the date of the approval. On the PDF version, whereas on the electronic version it's very simple to identify who the reference listed drug is, because it has either a no or a yes in the reference listed drug column, the way that's identified in the PDF version, if you'll see the plus sign in front of NORQD, which is the 4th product down in that list, that little plus sign designates that that's the reference listed drug for that. And then there's another one, which again goes back to my previous example about having an AB1 and an AB2. There's another product, the Micronor by Janssen, which also has a plus sign. And if you look down at the bottom, where the electronic version is, you will see that those 2 products have in the 3rd column from the left a yes for designation that those are the reference listed drug. So there is a little difference in the appearance of what you see between the electronic and the PDF version, but the information can be gleaned from either one of the versions. It all depends on which you prefer to use. The next listing that I will talk about is the OTC drug products, which you will note is very similar to the other listing. Now here I'm showing you the PDF version for famotidine tablets, and as you can see, the products are listed by the dosage form. So at the top, I've got famotidine tablet, chewable oral, and then later on we have tablet oral. So there are two different line items, and we have two approvals. We have one for Paragon. We have the Pepcid AC, which you can see by the plus sign next to McNeil is identified as a reference listed drug. In the bottom are all the other famotidine oral tablets, non-chewable, that have been approved. And it's very similar information that I described earlier on the previous slide with the prescription drug product list. The interesting thing to note with this drug listing is that there are no therapeutic codes given for OTC products. The FDA has determined, even though the ANDAs for these products do require identification of the reference listed drug in a bioequivalence study to the reference listed drug, the FDA has decided that because these are not substitutable products per se by automatic substitution, but they are chosen by a patient when they make a selection themselves when they're buying OTC products, that they did not feel that it was warranted giving therapeutic interchange codes, the A's and the B's that I discussed earlier. So you will not see therapeutic codes for OTC products. Going on to the next listing is biologics that are approved under 505. So these are actual products. As you may know, that products can be approved, biologic products under the CBER, Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, are approved, can be approved either as a 505 or most often under the Public Health Service Act as BLAs. But as listed here, there are certain products that are regulated by CBER, but are approved under Section 505 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And this is the listing of some of the products there. And again, this is interesting that, at least to the best of my knowledge, I've not been able to find a link for this on the electronic version. It may be there, but I certainly haven't found it. And if anybody does know how to get at biologics electronically, I'd be glad to receive an email from you to let me know that there is a way of doing it electronically. I only know of looking at it through the PDF version. So in the PDF version, there's a list of the biologics that were approved under 505, and these are some of the examples from that page that shows these products have been approved through CBER, but under 505. Interestingly enough, the numbers that you see for the application numbers on this slide, you cannot search for them on the Drugs at FDA either, even though it says on Drugs at FDA side that they list all at 505 approvals. They are not there either. So that's an interesting thing to note. The next list that we're going to talk about is the discontinued products list. And these are, there is a section where if you were doing this electronically, you would type in the name of the drug in the field that comes up for searchable, and then you have those three options of looking at RX, OTC, or discontinued, and you would find the product that you were looking for if it was discontinued in the discontinued product list. In the PDF version, which this slide represents, you can actually see all the products that have been discontinued for this compound called acyclovir, both capsules and tablets. And interestingly, if you look down near the bottom of the slide, you will see a notation for the Teva 200 milligram product where it says that Federal Register determination that the product was not discontinued or withdrawn for safety or efficacy reasons. So if an ANDA wants to use a discontinued product as a reference listed drug, you would have to first ascertain from the FDA through a petition process as to the reason why the product is listed in the discontinued section. Now, as I said earlier, in the 1984 Waxman-Hatch Act, it said that products that were discontinued for safety and efficacy reasons are not to be listed. However, what the FDA does is if a product gets discontinued, it gets listed until somebody actually asks the FDA why it's on the discontinued list. And then FDA will research the reason why, and if it determines that it wasn't removed because of reasons of safety or efficacy, then that product can be used as a reference-listed drug to support an ANDA or a 505(b)(2) NDA. If it was removed for reasons of safety or efficacy, then it will be removed from the discontinued product and it will just totally disappear. The next list that we're going to talk about is the orphan drug list. And when you go to the PDF version or the latest version of PDF, all you have is a link there that you can get to a searchable website for orphan drugs where you can type in a drug and there's other fields that you can search for. But it doesn't have a list. And what you see here is from my 1998 edition where it actually listed all of the orphan drug designations and their approvals. So you can see, if you go down the list, and this is, as I say, just a snapshot of one of the pages, in the middle of the page, Cascara Sagrada fluid extract, you see, for the treatment of for the treatment of oral drug overdosage to speed lower bowel evacuation, was designated for as an orphan drug designation, and you can go through the list here. Otherwise, you'd have to actually search for a product in the electronic database, as there's just not a listing available like it would be in the older versions. The next list we're going to talk about is the drugs that can be approved with dissolution only. As I mentioned with the therapeutic codes, there are products that have what's called an AA therapeutic code listing, and these are products that can be approved based on a demonstration of adequate dissolution only, so they do not require an in vivo study. So if a product is on this list, and the list keeps getting shorter and shorter. At one time, this list was much longer, but as FDA determines that maybe their original thinking on this was that it really wasn't a non-bio problem drug, and that dissolution wasn't the only way to demonstrate or it wasn't adequate to demonstrate bioequivalence, it would drop off the list and would require a bio study and be converted to one of the B codes. Many years ago, I was involved with one of these products with what's called propanthyline bromide, which had been on the list as an AA drug. Some literature arose that showed that the product actually could, depending on the formulation, had different bioavailabilities, and the FDA then went to all the products that had received approval through AA, required them to do bioequivalence studies to demonstrate bioequivalence to the innovator product in order to maintain their listing as an A-listed product. So I said I was going to take some time and talk about patent and exclusivity, and now I'm switching back to the electronic version of the book. So if you were actually going to search for the drug called lenalidomide, Revlimid, this is what you would find if you actually went to the RX product. And at the bottom, the last item down there, it says patent and exclusivity info for this product, and it says view, and that's something you can click on, and we'll give you the patent and exclusivity information regarding this specific product. And this is the information that you would find. I apologize I couldn't get all the information that I really wanted to on this slide, but I will go through it. Some of the information on this slide is pretty self-explanatory, like the first column on the left being the NDA number, then the next one is the product number. Then the next listing is the actual patents that are listed for this product. So these are patents that the innovator company has submitted to the FDA in their NDA and are listed with that NDA. So FDA includes these in the Orange Book. Now, as many people know, the FDA says that they only have a ministerial role in the listing of patents, so they don't actually research the patents. However, several years ago, FDA has required sponsors that want to have patent information included in the Orange Book associated with their product to submit information that verifies that the patent that they are submitting actually applies to their product. One of the anecdotal stories that I had heard many years ago, that either by accident or on purpose, I'm not sure which, FDA actually listed a patent for an NDA product that was associated with a rubber tire. And when an ANDA applicant called up the FDA and said, how do we certify against that, they recognized their mistake, and whether it was a typo or whether somebody just goofed, they had to take that patent out. So now you can be fairly well assured that the patents that are listed are actually the ones that apply to the NDA product that is associated with those patents. The next listing is the next column. After the patent expiration dates are whether it applies to the drug substance claim or whether it applies in the next product, whether it applies to the drug product claim. And then the next column is the use patents that are associated. These are all use patents, and they're all a variety of uses. So with this drug, there are several different uses that are patented. Things like the drug is used to inhibit the secretion of cytokines, including tumor necrosis factor, alpha. Another use is the treatment of multiple myeloma and transfusion-dependent anemias in MDS. Another use patent is the treatment of transfusion-dependent anemia in MDS, which is very similar to the one I just said before, but it was issued another use patent. Another use patent is treatment of multiple myeloma. So you can see there are a number of use patents that the company has obtained a patent for, has then applied to the FDA to have those patents listed in the Orange Book. And the importance of these, as many of you may know, is that when you file your ANDA, you have to certify against these patents, one of the 4 certification processes that are used for either an ANDA or a 505(b)(2) NDA. At the bottom of this slide, you see exclusivity data. The top was patent data, the bottom is exclusivity data. As you can see there are 3 exclusivities that are associated with this product. The first one is which is number I-672, is an exclusivity that the company received for coming up with a new indication. So when they did a study, a clinical trial that required a new indication that required a clinical trial, they received 3 years of exclusivity for that, and that's the exclusivity expiration of June 3rd, 2016. Another one, the NS, stands for new strength, so that when they developed a new strength, they also received another 3-year exclusivity, but it has to be concurrent with the previous one. And the last exclusivity is an orphan drug exclusivity, which doesn't expire until June 5th of 2020. So this is a very valuable piece of information for people that want to find out what kind of patents and what kind of exclusivities there may be for an NDA holder. So as I said earlier, that there are certain things that are not included in the Orange Book. And if you're looking for that, you're not going to find it. And these are the type of things that you're not going to find. As I said very early in the presentation, the listing is of approved drugs only. So anything that is not approved by the FDA but still marketed, while you think you should be able to look it up in the Orange Book, it's not going to be there. So something like thyroid tablets, a pre-1938 drug that has been out there for years, I mentioned earlier, is not listed in the Orange Book. And any other pre-1938 drug that hasn't gone through an approval process but is still marketed will be out there on the market but will not be listed in the Orange Book. Other drugs that aren't there are DESI drugs. These are drugs that were in the Drug Efficacy Study Implementation Program, and there are still some drugs out there that the issue as to whether they're effective or not has not been resolved, and they're permitted to be marketed until that issue does get resolved. So those are not listed in the Orange Book. Examples would be like Donatol, Librex. Those products are marketed, but they're not listed in the Orange Book. As I mentioned earlier, biologics that were approved under 505 are in there, but biologics that are not approved under 505, that are approved under BLAs, that many of us consider to be drugs like erythropoietin, filgrastim, some of the monoclonal antibodies that are now probably the main, in some of the chemotherapeutics, are some of the main armamentarium of use. Those would not be listed in the Orange Book. The next section, which is important to note, that the next set of drugs that are one may find on the market but are not listed are authorized generics. So when a company has an authorized generic, it is not listed in the Orange Book. However, the authorized generic has the same therapeutic code associated with it. The only problem is you can't find it because it's not listed in the Orange Book. So you'd have to go back and find out who actually holds the application for that authorized generic. Another section of products that is not listed are distributors and repackers. So when you have a product that is being distributed by someone else or repackaged and marketed by someone else, those applicants or the names will not be found in the Orange Book. And the last thing on my list of things that are not included is tentative approval. So occasionally FDA will grant a tentative approval to a product, but it will not get listed in the Orange Book until that tentative approval is converted to a full approval. So in summary, I hope I've given you an understanding of the differences between the PDF version, the hard copy version, and the electronic version. So I would recommend that anybody that is working in this field make themselves very much aware of what the differences are between the two and the ease of use of the two different versions, and to be able to get at both of them when the need arises. Also, as I mentioned in the examples I showed you, you can see who your competitors are and how many potential competitors there are within a dosage form. As I mentioned in the presentation, one of the important parts of the Orange Book, or one of the important uses of the Orange Book, is identification of the reference listed drug. So hopefully you have an appreciation of how to find that for both in the electronic version as well as the PDF version of the Orange Book. And I talked about the patent exclusivity information and how you can find the information that you would need to find out if there are patents listed, what the patent numbers are, what the expiration of those patents, what those patents involve from the FDA's brief description of what those patents are, and the exclusivities that may be associated with a certain product. And the last thing you need to be aware of is that there is this discontinued product section of the Orange Book. So when you're searching electronically, you type in the name of the drug, and if you couldn't find it, you know it's out there, but you couldn't find it, then it's very possible that it could have ended up in the discontinued section. So you could click on that link, or else if you're using the PDF version, you could actually go to the section that lists all the discontinued products. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and open it up, Jeff, for questions and hopefully answers.
Nick, that was great. Thanks, and really chock full of information. I want to let the folks, the listeners, know that we will be sending this presentation to them so they can take a closer look at it. We've got time for just a couple of questions. The first question is, by looking at the product name in the Orange Book, how would you know whether it's approved as a biologic or a pharmaceutical drug product?
That's an interesting question. By looking at the name, if you find it in the electronic Orange Book, it is definitely approved under 505B as a drug, even though it may be a biologic. But because it is listed, and as the book itself says, it's drugs approved through the 505B section of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which means that it is a drug and it was not approved under the Public Health Service Act. So that would pretty well tell you that it was approved as a drug.
Okay. All right, thanks. And then I'm just going to do one more, and then there are some remaining questions, and we'll send the answers to the participants. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. The question is, can we base an ANDA application on an AB1 or an AB2, and maybe a clarification of the difference again between those?
Well, that is an excellent question. If FDA has designated two reference-listed drugs in a product line, the potential ANDA applicant can really pick either one of those. However, you must recognize that when you do your comparative, both ANDA development and your bioequivalence study, that will be the product that you will be considered substitutable for, and you will not be considered as being substitutable for the other product. Now, this is it's an interesting question from the point of view, does it really make a difference? And, from the perspective of legality, yes, it does, because from the legal perspective, substitution should not occur between AB1 and AB2 products, even though they may be identical products for all intents and purposes. However, because FDA has determined that these are two unique reference-listed drugs and generics that are equivalent to one versus the other also should not be substituted, it's important to pick the one that you think that is the market leader that you want to be substituted for, because that's what you're going to be when FDA does make the determination. That's the code that they will give you. It will be either AB1 or AB2, depending on which one you picked. So it is important to pick the right one.
Okay. All right, Nick, thanks for that. For the listeners, I encourage you to just take a moment and fill out the survey that you see on the left side of your screen. That would be really helpful. That wraps up the presentation, and my thanks to Nick and also to our audience participants.